I'm Andryanna. Welcome back to The Juggle is Real. And here we go, my friends. Here we go. We are heading back into another school year, and there's so much focus on getting the kids ready. We've got our lists, we're buying supplies, and we're figuring out our schedules. We're getting into our routines, and we're trying to make that transition from summer to September and fall and all of the things. We want it to be as smooth as possible, of course. But for today's conversation, we are looking beyond our backpacks and the school supply list, and we're asking a bigger question, which is, what do our kids actually need to walk into a classroom feeling ready to learn, ready to participate, to build confidence, and feel like they belong? Because oftentimes when a child is struggling, what we're seeing on the surface, it just doesn't tell us the whole story. You know what I mean? And we really need to be able to paint the picture from the inside out. And I learned this firsthand with one of my own children when we discovered that he needed glasses. And I can tell you truthfully, we had absolutely no idea. He wasn't like squinting or showing any signs because, of course, he didn't know any different. And it made me think about how easy it can be to interpret what we're seeing as, maybe poor behavior or excess frustration, or maybe there's difficulty concentrating, or maybe we think of it as an academic struggle without necessarily asking what else might be happening underneath the surface. So that is one of the reasons why I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. Today, I am joined by Suzanne Decary. She is the Senior Vice President of Programs at CNIB. And for more than 20 years, Suzanne has worked to advance opportunity, independence, and inclusion for people who are blind or living with sight loss. She began her career in direct service and vision rehabilitation. And today, she oversees CNIB's regional operations and programming across Canada. Suzanne has also led national initiatives supporting children, youth, and families, including CNIB's Next Generation Children, Youth and Families Program, and the CNIB Children's Charter of Rights. Throughout her career, her work has focused on empowering people, removing barriers, and helping build stronger, more inclusive communities. So today we are talking about children's vision, of course, the importance of comprehensive eye exams, but we're also going to speak in more broader ways as well. We're going to be getting into what can happen when a child's needs go unnoticed, how vision can affect learning and confidence, what parents should be watching for, the individualized support at school, inclusion and belonging, and just how we can become better advocates for our kids while also teaching them to advocate for themselves. So whether your child has low vision, perhaps they have an IEP, which is an individual education plan, or different learning needs, or you're simply heading into another school year wondering how you can best support them and the classroom, I think there will be something in this conversation for you. So let's dive right in.
This is the Juggle is Real podcast. I hope you feel seen, that you realize your worth, lighten your load, and prioritize your own needs. As we hear from leading experts and well-known faces in the wellness, entrepreneurship, education, and motherhood space, I hope you gain insights, proven practices, and learn actionable tools to help you enjoy the juggle of work, family, and everything in between with a little less stress and a lot more ease, joy, and fun. Most of all, I hope you find what you need to simplify, streamline, and supercharge your own journey of better balance and self-love. Are you with me? Let's get started.
This episode of The Juggle is Real is supported by Whirlpool. This won't be my first school season with the kids, and one thing I've realized over the years is that back to school isn't just about getting the kids ready. It's really about getting your systems ready. You know what I mean? Because once homework starts, well, we've got hockey starting, and then we're eating dinner at 3 p.m. and 8 p.m. Lunches need to be packed again, and everyone's water bottles somehow multiply overnight. And it's really those little routines that make the biggest difference in a smart appliance that helps you stay on track. That's one of the reasons why I love my Whirlpool appliances. They have technology that doesn't just keep up, but actively optimizes my day and performs at the highest level. One feature I think busy families will really appreciate is the new Whirlpool dishwasher with spin and load rack and AI intelligent wash. It's the first and only dishwasher with a 360-degree spinning lower rack. So instead of reaching over bulky pots or baking dishes or meal prep containers, you simply spin the rack and bring it within reach. It is such a smart design, especially, if you're doing those Sunday meal prep sessions or after a busy weeknight dinner. It makes both loading and unloading so much easier. And the sensor cycle takes all of the guesswork out of settings for you. It uses an AI intelligent wash that is designed with sensors to adjust based on, what's actually in the dishwasher, to detect how dirty it is, what the load size is, and the best water temperature. Whether it's lunch containers, snack cups, or that pan you roasted your dinner in, you can trust AI intelligence to do the work for you. When your intelligent appliance works hard to ensure your kitchen looks stunning and performs flawlessly, you get a little more room for everything else that matters. To learn more about the new Whirlpool dishwasher with spin and load rack, visit whirlpool.ca. That's whirlpool.ca. Now let's get back to the episode. Suzanne, welcome to The Juggle is Real. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. We're kind of getting into the back to school stuff, and I think the conversation we're going to have is going to help so many people. But before we get into it, I would just love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Can you share what it is that you do and what your own journey has looked like? I'd really love to know how you've arrived at the work that you're doing today.
Sure. So my title is Senior Vice President of Programs at CNIB, which is the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. And I have been with the organization for 21 years. It's interesting whenever I get asked, how did I find myself in this line of work, or to reflect on my journey, I find it a little bit tricky because I tend to be a really practical person, and I, sort of just think about what I need to do right now and what are the next few steps that I need to take. And I don't often spend as much time reflecting back. So I do like this question because it does give me an opportunity to kind of look back and put the puzzle pieces together and see how I landed where I did. In a nutshell, I studied psychology in university and initially was, hoping to become a therapist or even a forensic psychologist was something that I considered. And while I was studying, I had a part-time job working as a lifeguard at the Montreal School for the Blind. I went to school in Montreal. It was right across the street from my campus, so very, very convenient. And I had always, I had worked as a lifeguard for several years at that point. And little did I know that experience was going to completely change the direction of my life. While I was there, had the opportunity to spend time with kids who either had low vision or were totally blind. And I remember being really fascinated by how they navigated the pool and how they interacted with one another and with the teachers. And I felt like they navigated things that I would have considered a barrier so well, and it was really fascinating. So I remember talking to one of the teachers about how he got into that line of work, and he told me about a postgraduate program that you could do in Ontario, and to become a teacher of the blind. And I thought about it. I ended up graduating and traveling for a couple of years. But the idea stayed with me and I never really forgot about it. And so a couple of years later, I moved to Ontario, and in 2004, I enrolled in the program and graduated a year later, did a placement in Toronto. And that brings us to 21 years later, working in Toronto at the CNIB. My career's taken me in a lot of different directions, but I've been very fortunate to have this career with CNIB the whole 21 years. And one thing, that I always knew I wanted to do was work with people and help them find solutions to problems. And I've certainly done quite a lot of that at CNIB. So it's been very fulfilling, and I've been very lucky to have found myself where I find myself.
It's so fascinating. And I love the saying by Steve Jobs, like, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only do it when you're looking backwards, and the journey you've taken. And, as a parent myself, it's something as simple as, like, even enrolling our kids in swimming lessons, for you to become a lifeguard, and then for you to, be a lifeguard for the blind. Just, you could have never looked ahead and been like, this is the path I'm going to take. And we're thinking about back to school. We're thinking about how we can support our kids, and we want to look at school perhaps differently from, like you were saying, so many of us are so practical, and we're taking that very pragmatic approach. We want to get our kids ready for school, and that means, like, making sure we get everything on the school supply list. Or, one of my children is going to be in a school that has a uniform this year, so I want to make sure he has all the clothes he needs. And, of course, we care about academics, and we want our kids to succeed academically. But there's just so much more to it. So I would love to hear from your perspective. When we're thinking about September and back to school, what do kids really need when they're going into a new classroom in order to feel ready to learn and participate and just feel like they really belong there?
It's a really great point. Obviously, all of those things are really important, making sure that your kids have what they need physically to succeed. But what we sometimes don't think about is asking kids how they're feeling before they start school. Are they excited? Are they nervous? If they're nervous, why are they nervous? What are some of the things that they're unsure about, or not feeling so confident about? And then asking them, what do you need to feel more confident, and what do you need to feel more comfortable? For kids, it's about understanding that speaking up and asking for help is never a bad thing. And a lot of kids are embarrassed to put their hand up and ask for help, or to appear like maybe they don't understand when all the other kids seem to understand, or they're having trouble and maybe the other kids aren't experiencing trouble. I think we all know that it takes a lot of bravery to be the first person to put your hand up, because when you do that, you find a bunch of other kids will put their hands up too, and you find, oh, I wasn't the only one. There are others who are actually struggling, or who have a question, or don't know everything right away. You want to set kids up for success by first, having that conversation about how they're feeling, letting them know that it's okay to speak up, but then also letting them understand that they should be, if they're a child who maybe has vision loss, or is a child who has specific learning needs, that the classroom should be able to meet their needs. And if it's not meeting their needs, they do have a right to speak up. We use the word advocacy a lot, and self-advocacy, and that word can kind of sound intimidating to a lot of people, to adults. It means something different with kids. When you're saying to self-advocate, it really just means speaking up for yourself and being okay with saying, this isn't working for me, I need X. In order to do that, though, kids need to have the language to know what it is, to describe what they need. And so if you are able, for example, before school starts, it's really important to get an eye exam done so that you know how the child is seeing. And if there are needs around that, so if they need a pair of glasses, or you find out that they work better with more direct lighting or being closer to the front of the classroom, they should understand that, so that when they're in the classroom, they can say, this isn't working for me, and I have a solution. I need to sit a little closer to the board, or I need to do this. And it's so empowering if they know what it is that they need and they're not afraid to speak up. That can really make big strides towards building self-confidence.
Absolutely. It makes me think back to when our oldest, I have 3 children, our oldest was in kindergarten, and he was really struggling. And we didn't realize at the time, but he really needed glasses. And then this kind of snowballed into a whole other area, and I've talked about it on the podcast before. But when a child is struggling, what's actually happening underneath isn't obvious, because I can tell you as a parent who truly, if there was any sort of sign that I could have picked up on, I was missing it. And so it just
Mm-hmm.
wasn't obvious to us, that was something that he needed. So I guess my question is, like, how can we get better at looking beyond, say, for instance, there might be behaviors, or there might be your child might be struggling academically. And instead of just being like, oh, you need to study more, or like, you just need to sit down, or you need to listen, or you need to pay attention, how can we go beyond like what we think the issue is, and then kind of figure out what else might be going on? Because, something like vision for my son, it didn't seem obvious to us. So how can we maybe get more curious to kind of look below the surface if our child seems to be having a tough time?
It's a really great point. And don't beat yourself up, because it is so common. There are, so many parents who we did a study a few years back, CNIB, just looking at the reasons why parents don't take their kids for eye exams at an early age. You find after 7 or 8 years old, kids are seeing an optometrist more often. But before that, the rates are actually quite low. And so we wanted to understand, like, why is it that some parents are not taking their kids to the optometrist? And they said, well, I think I would know if there was something going on. I'd be able to tell if my child wasn't seeing properly. And in some instances, sure, there are some times where it might be a little bit more obvious. Some of the obvious signs are things like squinting, maybe covering one eye while they're watching TV, or bringing a book close to their face. That might indicate that they're having some trouble seeing.
Sure.
But there's a lot of other things. And I think you made a good point about jumping to a conclusion that, oh, if your grades are slipping, that means you need to study harder, or you're not paying attention and you need to, pay closer attention in class. But why aren't you paying attention? There's always a little bit more to the story. So before jumping to conclusions, I think what parents can do is really listen and really ask those questions about what's going on. I see that, your grades have dropped. Talk to me about that a little bit. Are you struggling in class? What frustrates you? What is it about math that frustrates you? What is it about English class that frustrates you? And just kind of keep asking those questions and unravel it a little bit more. And sometimes the answers are surprising and they're not what you would expect.
It's so true. And actually, in researching for our conversation, I learned that in most schools, up to 80% of classroom learning is visual. And I guess it was shocking to me, but I guess it does make a lot of sense, right? We're looking at the board, or we're using screens, or we're, looking at books. It makes so much sense, but that's pretty significant if you have low vision, or you need glasses, and you don't have glasses. I think we like you said, and for me too, like, my son wasn't squinting. It wasn't like he was complaining that he was having headaches or any of those things. And I do appreciate that you said don't beat yourself up about it, because of course there is a lot of guilt that comes with, oh, I should have known. But having conversations like this can support other people in bringing up perhaps undetected vision issues. So can you talk to us about the impact of something like undetected vision or low vision on a child's learning, also on their confidence, their overall experience at school? And, I didn't know my son needed glasses, but are there other signs that we should be watching out for, just, sort of besides the obvious?
Yeah, some of the obvious things are that if a child is struggling with their vision, it could be in a number of different ways. It could be that they're having trouble seeing in the distance. And almost everyone that I've spoken to has some kind of story from their own childhood or their family, like your situation with your son. My own self, I didn't know that I needed glasses until I was well into high school. I just assumed, sitting in the back of the class meant that you were like not that interested in class and you wanted to talk to your friends. And so I would often sit at the back of the class with my buddies, and we'd talk and we'd have a good time. And it wasn't until somebody said, "Oh, hang on, we got to look up at the board," that I remember saying to my friend, "Who can see from back here? Like, nobody can see the board from back here." And she looked at me and said, "I think you need glasses because we can all see the board just fine."
Wow.
But if you're 5 or 6 years old, you're probably not having those kinds of conversations with your classmates to understand, what they're seeing and what's normal. And, I went all those years assuming that other people were like me, that nobody could see. That was way too far to see clearly, when in fact that was not the case at all. So some of the things, like becoming a little bit disinterested or distracted, can be an indication that something's going on, and obviously can have an impact in the classroom on your grades and on your confidence. Because if you're struggling but you don't have the language and it looks like everybody else is doing well, you might feel not so great about yourself. You might feel like you're not as smart as the other kids, or you're not catching on to things as quickly as the other kids, and that can really do a lot for your confidence. One thing that is less obvious that I've heard other people talk about is, you hear people say, "Oh, so-and-so's clumsy. They're not that athletic. They're not that great at sports." Sometimes it's because they're not seeing, and they're not able to catch the ball because they can't judge. That eye-hand coordination can be difficult if you're having problems with depth perception, or if something's coming and it's outside of your field of vision. If you're having some trouble with your field of vision and you can only sort of see things that are, kind of more like tunnel vision, and things in the periphery are not clear, then it can feel like a ball is coming out of nowhere and you haven't had time to prepare to catch it. If you don't know those things are going on, it might just look like you're clumsy or you're not that athletic. And sometimes gym teachers or even parents might say that, "Oh, it's okay. We don't, you don't need to be good at baseball. You don't need to be good at soccer. We'll find something else for you." Instead of really probing and saying like, "So, why are you having trouble with that? Does it feel like the ball's coming out of nowhere? Is it tough to see?" So again, it's some of these things where it goes back to the assumptions, where you make those assumptions about what something is when it really there could be more underneath the surface. And then, that child grows up having certain ideas about themselves. I'm not as quick as the other kids. Mm-hmm. I'm not as athletic as the other kids. It takes me a little longer to learn things. My concentration isn't that great. Maybe I have ADHD. Maybe you do have ADHD, but maybe you don't. Maybe there's something else going on. So it can definitely do a lot for confidence. And the longer it goes, the more those ideas become solidified in kids' heads and become a part of their identity. "Oh, I'm just not as good at this as other people." So, ruling some of these things out early on is really, really important. And just opening the door up to have the conversation, ask the questions, and find out what else might be going on.
These are such good points. And I want to come back to the confidence piece, because that is so huge. And what you're saying is so true. I do want to just mention too, like, as you were explaining, like, so maybe you can't see the ball coming, or perhaps, you're on a field and the depth is difficult for you to perceive. Our nephew, actually, around the same time my son got his first pair of glasses, he got glasses. They were both 5 years old. And he was just sitting and like staring at the grass and like looking at each blade of grass. He didn't know that grass, like, that came up as blades of grass. He just assumed it was just this big green mass. And so he had, mm-hmm. The sensory issues, because, if you think something is just a solid mass and it has little pickies, it's going to feel strange, right? And you might have, some difficulties with that. He also didn't understand that trees had individual leaves. He just thought it was this big blob of green or orange or red, whatever the season would be. And so, what you're saying is so interesting, because as a child, you don't know what you don't know. I mean, none of us, for all of us, we
Exactly.
don't know what we don't know, and we grow up in this body and with the skills that we have. And as we grow, sometimes it can be difficult to speak up for yourself if you don't realize that anything could be any different. And so I do appreciate that CNIB really encourages parents to put that comprehensive eye exam on the list, especially when it comes to back to school, because I think early detection is really important. And I think there's something about before the age of 7. Is that something you can explain to us so that we can perhaps make sure we're putting it on our list?
For sure. I think so. A couple of things. A lot of provinces are eye exams are fully covered for children under the age of 19. So it is really something that parents can and should be taking advantage of. There's no cost for the eye exams. And so the earlier you do it, the earlier you can detect something and potentially treat it, whether it is a pair of glasses or something else. The reason it's so important to do it before the age of 7 is that there are actually a few eye conditions where treatment is most effective before the age of 7, and that's to do with the development of the eye. Afterwards, it becomes much less effective. One of the most
Mm-hmm.
common ones, one of the most common examples of that is amblyopia, which is otherwise known as lazy eye. You might have heard, people say, oh, I had a lazy eye when I was younger. My child has a lazy eye. The treatment for that is quite effective in the early days.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're able to do that and catch it quickly, then you can completely correct lazy eye. The longer it goes on, left untreated, the less effective the treatment will be, to the point where there may be permanent vision loss as a result of the condition. And there are a number of other conditions where, again, the signs and symptoms are not so obvious. There are some genetic conditions like RP, which is retinitis pigmentosa, and that we were talking about tunnel vision. That presents itself that way. But it can be quite gradual. And so that's one of those conditions where a child might think that they're just no good at sports because they're not able to see the ball coming from behind them or outside of their field of vision. And if you don't know your genetic history, then there are some of these things that are genetically linked that you could get testing for if you do know the history. But often people don't, certainly I know in our family, I don't know the medical history of, my grandparents or necessarily all of my family members. So people don't always know what to look out for. I think nowadays there's a lot more awareness about these things, and maybe we do have more information. But before the age of 7 is so important because, again, there are some eye conditions that can be completely treatable before that, but not responsive to treatment afterwards. The other thing that's really important to note that a lot of people don't know is that the Canadian Association of Optometry actually has a schedule for when you should be taking your child for eye exams. And it's pretty wild because I've worked, as I said at the beginning of the show, for 21 years in the kind of eye health world, and I had no idea what the schedule was. A lot of people don't. The earliest eye exam should happen at 6 months of age. And a lot of people have no idea that at 6 months you could actually test an infant's vision. But that is when the first eye exam should happen. The next one should happen at 2 years old, between 2 and 4. Sometime between 2 and 4 is recommended. And then by the time they're 5 years old and in kindergarten, at school, they should be having one every single year, which again is not that common. A lot of parents don't know that they should be doing this kind of preemptively as opposed to just when they see that there's an issue. Okay, let's bring you in and get your glasses. There's a lot more going on in the back of the eye that is not obvious to the person experiencing it or anybody else around them. It needs an optometrist to look into the back of the eye and check the health of the eye. So that's why it's so important. 6 months, first eye exam, between 2 and 4 for the next one, and then every year after. And again, they are covered in most provinces all the way up to the age of 19. And for any parent who maybe doesn't have benefits and there would be potentially a cost associated with getting glasses, if it is determined that your child needs glasses, there are actually a lot of programs, subsidy programs that they can take advantage of that will pay for one pair of glasses every year or every other year. So there's a lot out there to say, do it. Get your child's eyes tested.
Absolutely. And it's so nice to hear that some of those barriers have been removed or reduced to support families, because of course there's so many different costs and everything seems to be rising at a rapid rate. And so it's really helpful to know that the eye exams are covered, and if your child does need glasses, that could be a support as well. And of course, once you know better, then you can do better. And so this awareness piece is just so important. And saying 6 months, I mean, it sounds just so little, these little babies. But
Yeah.
once I knew, and once I knew my oldest had glasses, it was on my radar. And so actually all three of my children wear glasses, all for completely different reasons. My youngest started with his glasses at 18 months. And I don't know what the technical term is, but he had like a crossed eye. And so again, like you're saying, it's something that can be easily corrected from a younger age, right? Not something that a child or a teen or a youth would have to live with, simply because, that's how you were born. It's something that has been corrected for him, which is so nice. And it kind of brings me into that confidence piece that we were talking about earlier, because as we were saying, yes, we know school is about more than academics, and it really is that primary place where our children are, seeing themselves in the world, and they're making friends, and they're, gaining a sense of independence and a sense of belonging. And it can be a challenge for some children who have different needs. And I love your example of, like, I used to sit in the back of the class because I thought, that's where the cool kids were and we chat and whatever else. I've seen firsthand how it can be a challenge. So from your perspective, like in a broad sense, how can we better support our children who experience or access the classroom differently, whether it be vision or other challenges or things that they might not even know about, so that they can feel like, they can truly be part of it and gain that sense of belonging?
There's a lot of different ways that we can go about it. And I think one of the most important things is that we hear from kids that they don't like to be singled out. They don't like to feel like they're different necessarily from their classmates. And sometimes when a child has an accommodation, they might have a tool that makes them stand out from the rest of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes kids can even be jealous of the extra attention that another child gets if they've got support in the classroom with an itinerant teacher who sits next to them and provides support. Sometimes the child themselves feels self-conscious that they've got this thing that other students don't have. And then the other students feel a little bit jealous. Why does so-and-so get the extra attention? Why do they get to talk with this person? And sometimes those accommodations are needed, but if you can make the classroom as accessible to as many different learning styles and as many different needs as possible to really kind of level that playing field. I know teachers have a lot on their plates, and they have big classrooms, and they have a lot to deal with. They have students who all have different needs. But I think that's why it becomes extra important, because there's only so many specialists that are out there and only so much time that you can avail of those specialists. The main classroom teacher is really the one that has the most time with those students. So if they can try to make their curriculum and their classroom environment as accessible as possible to as many different types of needs and learning styles, then kids are going to feel that sense of belonging. They're going to have that sense of inclusion that does create better confidence. It's when you feel that you're not keeping up or you're somehow different that confidence can tend to dip. There's a lot of different ways that classroom teachers can get additional support. CNIB in particular has a program called Inclusive Classrooms, and we have speakers who have the lived experience of blindness themselves, often are guide dog users who will come into the classroom to talk to students about what it's like to live with vision loss, what it's like to live as a blind person. Kids are amazing. They are so much more receptive to ideas and perspectives, I think, than adults are. And so getting to kids early on, to your classmates, they can be the biggest support for each other. And I find, I don't know if you find this because you've got young kids, I see a lot more kindness with kids between each other, looking out for each other, helping to support each other than maybe when you and I were growing up. I see a lot, if kids know that somebody has maybe needs some direction when they get out onto the schoolyard, then they can go up to that child and say, "Hey, do you need help getting, to the schoolyard, or are you looking for somebody? Let me help you find them." I think once kids know and understand that if you see a child standing around who's looking a bit lost, maybe they're new, maybe they don't see well, maybe they have issues with their hearing. There could be all kinds of things. But once you open the door for kids to understand that other kids move through the world differently and have different needs, they tend to want to be a support for each other. They can really be the best support. So those classroom presentations that we do are so successful for that reason. We introduce them to the different types of tools that people use, and even things that everybody uses like tablets and smartphones, how they have accessibility built into them, and how somebody who's blind can actually use the very same tools that everybody else is using, just in a different way. And then I think it comes back to students having that confidence to speak up for themselves. I think the more they practice doing that, the more it becomes second nature, and the more confidence they build when they're really able to say, "This is what works for me, and this is the kind of support I need to be successful."
I love that. And also too, it kind of brings up, the conversation that we can have with our family, regardless of whether they might be experiencing low vision, or they might be having, something else in the classroom that would require additional support. Just about that inclusivity aspect, and being able to see someone and ask if they do need help, and to be supportive for those. Like you said earlier, though, some things that you assumed would have been barriers was not an issue at all to the people that you were working with when you were a lifeguard. But it does bring up a good point of, like, just having these conversations makes it easier for children who might be experiencing a challenge to be able to speak up for themselves, but also for those who may not have that challenge to keep an eye out for someone who might need help, later down the road, which is beautiful. And bringing it back to the classroom, a lot of educations can still feel really one size fits all, and we do want to be able to meet kids where they're at. And there are different things that our schools are doing. One of my kids has an individual education plan, an IEP. I do reach out to teachers at the beginning of the year just to say, by the way, it's going to be best for my son if he sits near the front of the classroom. Just these little things. But like you're saying, our teachers are incredible, and they have a classroom with so many children, and it can be difficult to kind of give individualized support because there are so many different needs. But where do you see opportunities for schools to sort of better support different ways of learning and participating? As we start a new school year, perhaps we can send an email, or maybe we're on the parent council, or, maybe we can, offer volunteer or offer our support, or just pose the question. Are there any things that we can be asking, or any opportunities for ways that we can support different needs?
Yeah, I think that, like you said, an individual education plan is very meaningful and is something that can be really helpful for a student in the classroom. But needs change. And so being able to review, make sure that there's a process to review those individual education plans throughout the year with the teacher, to have that ongoing dialogue. Is this still working? Because again, sometimes there are things that maybe the child's not quite ready to speak up about, or they don't even realize that their needs are changing, that the teacher might be able to keep an eye out for. Often we find that teachers, we get a lot of stories where it's the teacher who saw something going on in the classroom and recommended, hey, have you considered taking your child for an eye exam, or have you considered having them tested for ADHD or whatever it is, because they're used to seeing how those small changes in the classroom, they're able to kind of pick out when something is different and try and, identify what that might be, or at least lead you to the right resources to be able to identify it. So I think for parents to have that open dialogue with the teachers to say, have you noticed anything that's changed? Because behavior is different at home sometimes too than it is at school. They're doing different things at school. They're using different skills potentially at school that they're maybe not using at home, or they're doing differently. So there can be a difference between what parents see at home and what teachers are able to observe at school. So keeping that line of conversation open. I had mentioned the Inclusive Classrooms Project. I think things like that, there's other things that they can do too. I remember some of the things that I experienced when I was a child that I will never forget, that completely changed the way I viewed other people's behavior or interacting with other people and their abilities. I remember in school we had an assembly where a gentleman who I think had experienced thalidomide. He was a thalidomide baby, so he didn't have any arms actually, and he was on stage playing drums with his feet. And and that's how the assembly opened, was him on stage opening up with a set on the drums. And it's things like that stick with people, that, oh yeah, there's different ways people can drive, and people can paint and do all kinds, and play the drums and do all kinds of things that you may not assume. When you have those experiences early on and you have exposure to different ways of learning and different ways of being, it really, really opens kids' minds. I think maybe even giving kids an opportunity to talk about their, what works for them and their experiences with their classmates kind of demystifies things, and it just normalizes that, hey, everybody has different needs, and everybody responds differently to different things. Even all of us have different learning styles. We're not all visual learners. Some of us learn better by listening. Some of us learn better by doing and being hands-on. So having opportunities to highlight the beauty of the differences and the diversity that you have in the classroom is really, really important. And then just knowing about, I think for parents and teachers, knowing about the community supports that are out there. CNIB's got Inclusive Classrooms, but we also can help connect teachers and students to technology that can be useful in the classroom. There are a number of different organizations who have very similar resources available for classroom accommodations, things that are really specific that, may not be obvious. One of the things that we hear often is that kids get left out of gym class because there's a feeling that maybe the activity is not safe for the child, or they're not sure how to explain that activity to a child who has different needs, or to a child who's got low vision or who is blind. So they often just are left out of the class, or are told to go on the stationary bike while the other kids are playing a sport. And we've provided, there's absolutely no reason why you might not want to include some of the sports that are adapted sports into the regular curriculum at school. fully sighted kids can learn how to play goal ball, which is a sport that was created for individuals who are blind. It's very accessible because kids all are blindfolded. So everybody is playing on an even on an even field, playing field. So, but it normalizes it. It's goal ball then becomes just a sport, not a sport for the blind. It's a sport anybody can play. Yeah, I think those are some of the ways that can just help keep the lines of communication open between parents and teachers, and just keep the lines of communication open between the students and the teachers as well.
You've made some really good points. Any other maybe suggestions? Sometimes as parents, we may understand what's not working, but for many of us, we might not necessarily know, like, okay, is it my place to push, or is it okay? Or and for our children too, to support them having their own voice. And you said advocate is a big word, but to just speak up for themselves, like, how can we advocate effectively for our kids at school, but then also help them build that confidence so that they can do it themselves? So for instance, I love the example of the gym class, and a student perhaps not, being invited to play because the assumption is that they're not able. Any other tips or suggestions for if we're encountering something like this, or if things like this arise, what can we do to support our kids or help them find that voice for themselves?
Yeah, I think that again, it's really keeping the channels open and not having any assumptions. So even if
Mm-hmm.
you don't have any reason to believe that there's anything that might not be working at school, I think it's still important to ask those questions. Does my child struggle with anything in the classroom? What strategies, if they are struggling with something, what strategies have you tried? What's been effective? Maybe that's something that you can carry on at home and reinforce as well. It kind of creates a bit of a conversation rather than always putting the parent in the position of having to, really go in hard and
Mm-hmm.
advocate. My child needs this, and my child's not getting that. And it makes it more conversational. What have you noticed? And it might put that idea in the teacher's head that, well, maybe I need to pay a little bit more attention to changes, or noticing what's going on with the students. Again, I think parents are quite sympathetic to the load that teachers have.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's where they're really reluctant to say anything, because they like the teacher and they know the teacher's doing their best, and they don't want to come down heavy, or appear difficult to
Yes.
to the classroom teacher. A lot of parents have that feeling. But I think it's all like everything in life with communication, it's all in the way that you approach it. And if it's really about a dialogue that where you come from the place of, hey, I know as an educator, you want the best for your students. And as a parent, I obviously want the best for my child. Let's, how can we be doing better? What's working? What's not working? You don't have to have all the answers. You don't even have to have the right language, and know exactly, sometimes those are big terms. A lot of parents don't know about IEPs, the individual education plans, or specific accommodations. There are rules around these things. You don't have to come in knowing all of that. It's just about asking the right questions about how your child is doing, and how you can make it better. It is good to understand, though, what is available, what kinds of supports are available in the classroom, so that, if you're finding that there's a pattern where something's been identified but it's not been resolved, you can open that door and say, well, I understand that, we could have an IEP to identify specific accommodations for my child, for example. So it is important to stay informed, but really I find the thing that works the best is just having that open dialogue, that more free-flowing conversation about, how can we best support my child in the classroom? What can I do to help you, teacher, in the classroom? And what do you need from me?
Absolutely. I think it's so true, what you were saying, many of us are kind of like non-confrontational, or we don't want to, like, be seen as the difficult parent, or we don't want our kids to be labeled the difficult one, or we don't want to see that conflict. So I love, approaching it with that curiosity. And in my experience, I've had been met with nothing but, openness and a willingness to, tried new things or see what works. And we've gone back and forth asking questions of, what has worked in your experience, or what can we do at home to better support things. So I do really appreciate your stressing of like just keeping the lines of communication open, and approaching it from that place of, it's coming from a loving place, it's coming from a supportive place on both ends, both for the classroom, both for the teacher in the school, as well as for your child. And so as we close things out, Suzanne, I would love to hear from you. With families entering into this new school year, there's so many emotions. We're excited, we're nervous, all of the different things. What are a few things that we can do both at home, and maybe in advance with our children's school, to help our kids feel confident, to help them feel supported, and just feeling, ready to have a wonderful year, to truly thrive? And if there are families who might need additional support around accessibility, around vision, any advice for you? You've already explained and listed some items. Any other places that we can turn to get that support?
I think what's really important to know is that you don't have to wait until your child is struggling. You don't have to wait for that to happen to take action. You can start the school year off by asking those questions, asking your child the questions about how they're feeling. We talked about that earlier. Are you excited? Are you nervous? Make sure that if there are needs that have been identified, that they're being addressed, that you've got that kind of organized right at the beginning of the school year and addressed with the teacher or the principal at the beginning of the school year. Remind your child that needing support is not a weakness at all. It is just, we all need support, and it is okay to ask for it. It is okay to receive it. Some practical things you can do before sending them off to school is you can ask them if there was anything from the year before that made things easier or harder. So ask them to think about, hey, how did last year go? What do you want to see continue on this year? What needs to happen that's different? How do we not repeat that bad thing that happened last year? Pay attention to their behavior before school starts and then after school starts. If you're seeing any changes, there's, often issues with bullying, sometimes with, interactions with other kids. There's a lot that can be going on in addition to something like vision loss or a learning challenge. So really paying attention to the behavior. What was it like at the beginning of the school year, and what's it like a few weeks in, a few months in? Make vision a part of your back to school checklist. Ensure that you've got that appointment with the eye doctor booked in there and ready to go, so they start the year off knowing what that level of vision is. And if there's an issue, it can be addressed early on. If there are issues, beyond what can be corrected with a pair of glasses, an organization like CNIB is available to talk families through and provide support. We have parents groups so that you can meet with other parents who have a child with sight loss and learn from each other. We find that's often the very best way to learn. And I think parents in general, your podcast does just that, right? It brings other parents together to talk about their experiences and learn from each other. That's often the best way to make it through life, is to learn from each other. There is so much support that's available, whether it's an issue with vision or any other, learning challenges, physical challenges, behavioral challenges. There are lots of organizations that have peer support groups and really practical supports. We're all here to be that wraparound support to the school system, because no one's an island. No one expects schools to have all of the answers or parents to have all of the answers. We all have to work hand in hand to best support a child. The old saying of "it takes a village" is never been more true. It really does. No one should have to face anything alone, and there's a lot of help out there. So just knowing who to reach out to, is really, really important, especially if once you know what you're dealing with. If there is a challenge, again, going back to vision, CNIB can help you navigate, whether it's our own services or other services that we can connect you to. We're here. We very specifically have some resources online at cnib.ca/back to school that talk about school readiness and preparing for that back to school season.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's so true. It takes a village. Many of us feel like we are doing it alone, but this conversation is proof that there really is so much out there and so many people who want to support our children and help our families and really see them thrive. I will put that link in the show notes, cnib.ca/back to school. Some really great resources there to support us. And so definitely make sure we check out the link. It's been such a pleasure meeting with you and learning about your journey. And I just want to say thank you for this conversation and thank you for the beautiful work that you do to support Canadian families.
Thank you. And I would say the same to you. Thank you for everything you do to help and support families.
Wow. I mean, before we wrap up, I would like to say and give a huge thank you to Suzanne Decary for joining me and for sharing not only her expertise, her personal experience and journey, but also the work that CNIB is doing to support children, youth, and families across Canada. There were some things that really stood out for me from this conversation. And really, first and foremost, it is just that simple reminder, but such an important one, that when a child is struggling, what we're seeing on the surface isn't always the whole story. I think as parents, it's really easy, like, we're focused on the report card, or maybe there's some frustration, or there's behavior, or there's resistance. And then we're just trying to fix that piece, try to fix the behavior, try to fix the frustration. But sometimes our job is just to take it one step further and just get a little curious about what's underneath it, and vision may or may not be one of those things. So today's conversation was just a really good reminder that a comprehensive eye exam deserves a place alongside everything else that we are thinking about as we get ready for, like the kids ready for back to school and the fall and starting a whole new season. The bigger takeaway for me really is that getting kids ready to thrive at school is also so much more than just academics. It is confidence and it's belonging and it's, just having those individual needs recognized. And it's knowing that there are adults who understand them and who want to support them and want to advocate for them. And as they grow, it's helping our children understand that what they need can be advocated for themselves and that they can do that as well. I know from my own experience that it can sometimes feel so daunting, when your child needs something that's a little bit different. You don't always know the right questions to ask, or you might not know what support is available. But just because something is different or unique, it doesn't mean less capable. And support isn't about lowering expectations. It's really about helping our children access those opportunities so that they can learn and participate and thrive as well. So if you would like to learn more about CNIB's programs and resources for children, youth, and families, or find additional information about supporting a child who is blind or living with sight loss, I'll make sure those resources are linked in the show notes for today's episode. And of course, if this episode made you think of another parent, a friend, a caregiver, maybe a teacher, someone who works with children, I would invite you to please share this with them. Sometimes simply knowing what to look for, or maybe just a question to ask, can make such a meaningful difference for children. You can also take a screenshot, right now while you're listening, share it to your Instagram stories and tag me at Andryanna G. I would truly love to hear what stood out from you from today's conversation. And of course, make sure you're following, subscribe, follow The Juggle is Real wherever you're listening so you know and you don't miss what's coming up next. Rate, review, do all of the things. Mostly, thank you so much for being here, spending part of your day with us. Until the next episode, thank you so much and take good care.